right? And I get blowback on these things all the time. But the thing is I can do it. I can say it my own way. I can make the arguments. I don't have to appeal to those people. I only have to appeal to the people who get it, right? Who get it the way I get it, right?
This is the Agency Profit Podcast, the podcast for agency owners that want to run a more profitable business that doesn't depend on them. Introducing your host, CEO and co-founder of Parakeeto, Marcel Pettipaw.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Agency Profit Podcast. I am joined today by a special guest. He is the podcaster extraordinaire. I recently met him when I was a guest on one of his many shows. He's the CEO and founder of a company called DevChat TV, an organization that does podcasts, reaches over 70,000 software developers every week. They've done over 3,100 podcast episodes across over 25 shows. He has been podcasting since 2008, so over a decade of podcasting experience. He's also the instructor at the Podcast Playbook, where he provides step-by-step procedures to teach other people how to produce podcasts. And you'll never guess what he's here to talk about today. Yes, that's right. How to create a podcast for your business. So with all of that, thank you, Charles Max Woods, for being here today with us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love doing this. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's meta. We're doing a podcast about a podcast, but what can I say? This has been a super important format for our business. It's something that I've loved to do. I've met a lot of great people through, and we get a lot of questions from listeners about our content, but also about our content in the sense that people want to know, how I started the podcast, what kind of microphone I'm using, how, what's the process look like on the back end? A lot of people curious. And so when you offered to come on and share kind of what you've learned from creating thousands of podcast episodes, I thought, well, this would be a great value add for everyone at home. So with all of that, I've given everyone the spark notes on who you are, but I'd love to give you a chance in your own words to just explain a little bit about what you do and how you help people through podcasts.
Right. So it all started, I think, back in like 2007. A friend of mine started it was a YouTube channel and a video series about how to do programming with Ruby on Rails. And what was funny was that he started looping friends of his in to make the videos. And so I did a video for him, and then I did another one, and I started tweeting about my experience doing the screencasts and mentioned out there that I was using ScreenFlow, I think at the time, and that I wished I had a nice mic. And so Telestream actually emailed me and sent me a microphone so that I could do better quality screencasts. And then I reached out to one of the podcasters I was listening to. People in the programming space will know him. It's Greg Pollock. He started Code School and a bunch of other places. But I emailed him, and I thought podcasters were these web celebrities, right? And turned out that he was just a dude in Orlando. And so he emailed me back and was like, yeah, you should totally start a show. And here's how you get started. And, and so I started interviewing people. I think I interviewed him for episode 1 or 2. I interviewed somebody else that I started a podcast with for episode 3 of that show back in 2008, about this time of year, 2008. And anyway, I really enjoyed it. And I alternate between talking about what I was working on and interviewing people. That's how it all kind of got rolling.
Awesome. So, and it's interesting because it starts off and it starts getting you clients for your consulting business. But then I think another interesting misconception about the podcasting game, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, and it's one that I had for a long time, which is like, well, the podcast isn't going to make me money as a podcast. It's going to make me money on the back end for my business, right? It's going to be a way for me to get clients. And then, you start to realize like, well, wait, no, if I have an audience here, like the podcast can be profitable as a marketing channel. It can actually be like a reverse cost, like net positive marketing channel. And, this is clearly the story for you, because at some point you actually ended up just not having to do consulting anymore and went full-time into podcasting. I'm interested in understanding, when it comes to sponsorship, how much of that is people approaching you and how much of it is you going out and creating these opportunities for sponsorships? How do you think through that, how to value it, what to charge for it, and how to find the people that are going to be interested in paying you to sponsor the show?
Right. So finding the people who will sponsor the show, that's kind of where I'm going to start. Anything that appeals to your audience Anybody who sponsors that will probably sponsor you. Okay. Or at least talk to you about it. So that boils down to YouTube channels, other podcasts, conferences, blogs, other online events, webinars. People who make their own online courses are usually good candidates. So anything like that, those are the people that you want to be looking at. And so I actually have trained my sister to go out and find these folks, right? And so she actually goes and looks at all of the competing, in quotes, competing podcasts in my space, and then we'll list out who's sponsoring them. And then we have a methodology for finding their email addresses and asking them if they're interested in sponsoring us. And that works out pretty well. About half the people that wind up sponsoring, though, they actually just come straight to us, right? So I have a landing page. It just walks them through the process of sponsorship, and a lot of people fill out the contact form, and then I just get back to them and see if we can work something out.
I like that strategy of reverse engineering people that are already spending money sponsoring things in your target market. That's a really smart strategy. So then when it comes to pricing, this is something that is nebulous for a lot of folks. Like, what should you be charging for a podcast sponsorship? And how does that relate to the size of your audience and the number of shows you have, your frequency? What are the factors that we need to consider when we're trying to come up with, a reasonable price for a sponsorship?
So I've done this a couple of ways. One way, and I think the most easy to understand way, is just per 1,000 listeners, you charge a certain amount, right? And the problem with that is that different audiences engage at different levels. So you have some audiences that are just going to be hyper into anything you talk about. And so you say, hey, go check out this thing, and off you go, right? You get a ton of people over there. Or sometimes you have to do a little bit more work, and so you'll wind up actually interviewing them for your podcast. You'll wind up sending out an email campaign and doing a bit more work so that they get their money's worth out of the sponsorship. And so then you can charge a higher amount for the number of listeners you have. That said, it seems like most people I talk to, they're coming in around $20, $25 per 1,000 listeners, except in my space. So in the programmer space, and this is the reason why it all depends, right? If you're in a niche where people drop more money for products, right? So their cost per acquisition is, $200, but their lifetime value for their customers is $300. Well, then those people are willing to spend way more to sponsor your podcast, provided that they have enough people coming in. Right. And so if that's the case, then you may want to have a different conversation with them. And instead of negotiating that cost per acquisition or negotiating that cost per 1,000 listeners, you actually work something out where you get a commission every time you sell something.
Right. It's like an affiliate link kind of thing.
Yeah, basically. Some of them work that way, and some of them, like, they don't have like an official affiliate program, but they'll work something out with you so that, every time somebody signs up, you get a chunk of change, right?
Okay. Interesting. Those are some interesting stats. Like CPMs, $20 to $25. That's a good thing to know. And, it sounds like for the right product, the right person, affiliate fees might end up being, a better win-win for kind of both parties. So good advice there. Now, I know there's a lot of people listening that are probably on the fence. They've been thinking about creating a podcast for some time now. I think everyone I've talked to in my life has an idea for a podcast. They just haven't created it yet. So my first question for you, and this is one of the debates that I'm having with people lately, is the podcasting space saturated? Are there too many podcasts, or is there still a ton of opportunity in this space? What are your thoughts, Charles?
Let me put it as succinctly as possible. No, no, it's not saturated. Like some spaces, it's harder, right? But it's not saturated. No.
And so why is podcasting, from your perspective, such a great format for somebody that wants to start creating content in a specific industry or in a niche?
So the thing is a lot of people compare it to like TV and radio, and it's like, I'm going to put together my own show, right? And I'm going to be just like so-and-so that I listen to on the radio. And I always want to just grab them and shake them and go, no, you don't. You don't want to be like them, right? Well, if I'm listening to a show about something that I'm interested in, then I want to listen to people that I identify well with. Okay. And the more general you are, the harder that is. Now, if you're going to go create like true crime is like a huge podcast segment, right?
Yeah.
And if you're going to go do that and you can find interesting stories, then yeah, you can be general appeal, right? Comedy shows are general appeal. They don't make any money, but they're general appeal, right? But if you're going to be doing it for a niche, for a group of people that have specific common concerns and, are working through things together the same way, right? Like a programming community in my case, right? Then it makes a whole lot more sense to niche down. And so that's one area that podcasting just blows everybody out of the water. YouTube, you can do kind of the same thing, right? You just niche down and then you get in front of the people who are in that niche who self-identify that way. But the other thing is that you also have to be kind of general purpose generic as yourself on the show as the host, right? Because you don't want to drive people away if you're trying to get that giant audience. And so as a podcaster, you can actually be as quirky as you want, right? I can go in and I can tell people. And so I have like 6 things that I'm just like, you're doing this on your podcast, knock it off, right? It's stupid. If you're doing it, you're not doing it right. Right. And I get blowback on these things all the time. But the thing is I can do it. I can say it my own way. I can make the arguments. I don't have to appeal to those people. I only have to appeal to the people who get it, right? Who get it the way I get it, right? And so when I go in and I tell people, you have a podcast, and I haven't seen your artwork, so bear with me, right? But your artwork has your face plastered all over it. Well, nobody cares who you are. Your show's not about you. Your show is about your audience. It's about the problem you solve. It's about the niche you serve, right? And so somebody's going to show up and they're going to see the Joe Blow podcast with your face on it, and they're going to know for sure that show's not for them. But if your show is build mobile applications with React Native show, right? Then they know that's what the show is about, right? And so you show a mobile device or, app store information or, a growth chart or something, right? And so you're telling them this show is about what you want to know about.
Hey, it's Marcel here, and I want to take a moment to thank you for being a loyal listener of the show. If you're enjoying today's episode, then I want to encourage you to subscribe so you never miss another episode, and be sure to check out some of the other amazing free resources we have at parakeeto.com to help you improve your agency's profitability. We have lots of other content just like this episode, including other detailed blog posts on some of the key topics, and free downloadable resources like the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which has helped hundreds of agencies improve their profitability with checklists, templates, and free training videos to help you install the Agency Profitability Flywheel all on your own. So if you're interested in grabbing that, head over to parakeeto.com and check the show notes as well. So with that, I want to thank you again for tuning in. I'll let you get back to the episode. I hope you enjoy it. Cheers. Yeah. And I mean, some of the things that I'll add to that, just like in terms of why I think podcasting is such a tremendous format, is the efficiency from a content production perspective. Like, I'm able to sit here with you, Charles. We're going to have a 30, 40-minute conversation. And then I'm going to have social media content, YouTube content, video content, audio content. Like the level of efficiency in terms of how I can take this and then create valuable content for all the different platforms and places where we want to exist as a brand is unparalleled. And it's the reason that I chose this format, because it felt like the most natural way for me to produce content. I love talking to people, in case you can't tell. It's easy for me. This doesn't feel like work when I see it in my calendar. Contrary to a blog post, if I see that I have to write a blog post in my calendar, I want to go crawl back into bed that day. But if I see that I have to have a conversation with Charles, I'm like, cool, it's going to be a good day today. I can do that. I can handle that. So I love how easy it is to post-produce podcasts and turn it into any kind of content that you want to, and turn it into content that is growing statistically. Audio, video content is absolutely skyrocketing. Yeah. People are consuming audio and video way more than they're consuming blogs. And you can still take this, transcribe it, get the SEO juice. I mean, that's what we're doing on our website. So on top of being able to your point, be very specific about who you want to talk to, niche down, make your podcast very discoverable from, the perspective of what problem you're solving. It's also just so efficient. It's such an efficient way to create content.
Well, the other thing is, just to put that out, I mean, you can transcribe your podcast, right? And then massage it into a blog post. I mean, you can take it all those different directions. But the other thing is that I get that it's not for everybody, but it is very natural for me to talk to people. It is less natural for me to sit down and write, or, even the video. I'm trying to get into it, and it's different, and it's different enough that it's hard, right? I want to put stuff up on YouTube, but I've still kind of been, I have this euphemism that I use on podcasts. I'm still clearing my throat, right? I'm still figuring out what my voice is going to be. And that includes actually being on the video and being present, right? And do I need to add captions? Do I need to have something, in from the side or out to the side, or go click here or check out our other video, right? That, it's natural to me on a podcast. Of course, I've been podcasting for 12 years, but it's less natural for me that way. And so, you can find ways of doing that. You can also, there are so many formats for podcasts, much more, I think, than even video, which is kind of counterintuitive because the video includes the audio. But the flip side of that is like, if you're doing a highly produced show, then your video has to be highly produced too. But if you're just doing highly produced audio, it's a lot less work. And you'll see that a lot with people doing things like, what are they called? The audio programs where they just tell a story and they've got background and sound effects and all that stuff, and so those are more produced, but they don't have to produce the video, right? And so they can tell the story and they can kind of paint a picture in people's heads and create that. The other thing that's nice about podcasts too is that people can do it. I hear people all the time and they're like, especially with COVID, we saw our numbers dip a little bit and then come back. And it was because I'm not commuting anymore, right? But it's convenient. I can mow the yard. I can go drive. I go on a trip. Any of those things, I can pop my earbuds in and I can listen to the show. And so people like that as well, as far as content goes. But as far as saturation, I want to go back to that just for a minute. The places where it's saturated tend to be at those higher levels, at the top levels, right? So a marketing show, good luck. Right? Good freaking luck. But if you're going to get into email marketing, right, it's still going to be competitive, but not as competitive, right? And then if you get into, email marketing with this particular twist using this system, right? And so maybe you create a ConvertKit related podcast or an active campaign related podcast. And so then you get into, hey, look, these are the email campaign choices that you have. And here's how you do it with ConvertKit. Here's how you do it with Active Campaign. And then the people who are out there trying to figure out what the crap is going on with ConvertKit, right? Then they're going to listen to your show and they're going to go, okay, I got the marketing concept right. And now I understand how to pull it all together. And so that's how you niche down. And I believe that we're going to see things niche further and further and further and further. But the other thing is podcasting is growing leaps and bounds every year. And so if you want to get in at the ground level, we're still at the ground level. I mean, it doesn't feel like it compared to, a few years ago, but we're still at the beginning. And we're seeing podcasts show up in more and more places. I mean, Amazon just opened up, right? I mean, I opened up Audible a couple weeks ago and I ran into the living room and I was like, Heather, my wife, right? Heather, look, podcasts in Audible, right?
Yeah. And Blinkist started doing podcast summaries and quotes. I mean, everyone's picking them up. And it makes sense because it's like, what am I doing when I go to the gym, mow the lawn, go on a commute, travel, anything, clean the house? I'm listening to podcasts. Go for a run.
Yeah.
100%. So for those that are listening who they're sold now, okay, your evangelism has worked and they said, okay, you've got me on Team Podcast. I want to start one. Where should they start? I mean, this is one of the places where, the stories that start rolling in people's heads is now I need to go buy $10,000 worth of professional audio equipment and I need to figure out how to use it.
Don't do that, please.
And I need to, I need an audio engineering degree. And they start to, I think, imagine the process of creating a podcast as being a lot more complicated than it actually is. Where does somebody start to get off the ground with their podcast? What are the things where they should be paying attention? And what are the things that are just kind of like, don't overthink it and just do it?
Right. So one of the things that people get hung up on, I had an old college roommate email me and he's like, which podcast mic should I get? And I'm like, the one you sound good on, right? I mean, I podcast enough to where I went and I bought myself a really nice microphone. Okay. I'm not going to tell you it costs almost $400, but it's a really nice microphone. Okay.
Right.
But if you're getting started, honestly, just use your phone. Your iPhone has a decent mic in it. You can record a dozen or so episodes on it and kind of clear your throat like we talked about before. And you'll kind of get the hang of what works for you, how you talk about things, what stories you like to tell, what works, what gets people into your show. And from there, then you can start worrying about the audio quality and things like that. I mean, as long as your audio quality doesn't totally suck, then you're in good shape. And like I said, the iPhone does it. Your AirPods or the Apple EarPods, which are the wired ones, those tend to have decent mics on it. The only rub, literally, with the EarPods is that they'll rub on your face, your beard, your shirt, and so you got to make sure that it's not doing that. But other than that, they sound fine. They don't sound professional, but they sound fine. And if you're getting started, that is enough, and people will listen to it because it sounds okay. And then from there you can go, okay, well, now I want something a little bit nicer. And so then you can go get like the Samson Go mic, which is like $50. The ATR 2100, I think it's 2100X now. Yeah, I thought that was what you were using. It's a great mic, and you can kind of level up from there, right? So you don't have to go and do all these things. Your artwork has to not suck, right? Because when people are browsing the App Store, they're looking at the title of your show. They might look at the title of some of your episodes, and they're looking at that artwork, and that's how they're going to decide whether or not they subscribe. Right. And so it's got to be obvious that this show is for me, right? In other words, don't put your dang face on it. And, make sure that it's in clear letters on your artwork, what the show is about. And just things like that, right? Make sure that there are good subscribe buttons on your website. Just use WordPress. Find a theme you like. It's not that complicated. There's a plugin called PowerPress. It's written by Blueberry that will put the player on your website. I recommend hosting through either Buzzsprout or Libsyn. And those are relatively inexpensive for hosting podcast files. And that's it, right? So you have to have a place, you have to have a website, you have to have a place to host your audio files, you've got to have artwork, you've got to be listed in the directories, and you got to be recording. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And to add to that, like one of the questions I had early on was like, well, how am I going to get my podcast on the 800,000 places that my podcast needs to go? These platforms take care of all that stuff for you. They take care of distributing your podcast all the different places. So it's very easy. Post-production, if you're not going to be the one editing the audio, there's people who are highly competent that you can find on Upwork and Fiverr to get your episode edited for like $25-$30. Like, it is incredibly inexpensive to get half decent.
Edit it. Just don't edit it.
Right. We're just don't edit it at all. Artwork, same thing. You can get decent artwork done on Upwork or Fiverr for a small investment. So I'd have the same advice. And if you go back and listen to the archives, for those of you that are kind of day one Agency Profit podcast followers, like, there's a huge difference between episode today and episode 1. And there have been gradual progressive improvements over time. And it's because I had that attitude. I was like, I'm just going to start doing this, and I'm just going to commit to being consistent, and over time we'll make the adjustments. And one of the things that, we have done in the past is said, like, well, we want to change our mid-roll. So you know what? We'll re-upload all those episodes with the new mid-roll, and that you can do that. That's the thing. It's a pain, but you can do it. Unlike YouTube, you can't re-upload a YouTube video.
It's so true. Yeah, it is flexible that way. I'm going to actually, I've been working on a checklist for this because I get asked about it often enough. And so I'm just going to put the checklist together. You can go get it at podcastplaybook.co/agency profit.
Okay.
And
agency profit. We'll put that in the show notes for you folks.
Yeah. It'll just be a PDF. And then you just go in and check it all off. Honestly, You mentioned that these systems like Libsyn and Buzzsprout and some of these other ones help you submit it to all the places you need to be in. But honestly, just remember these 4 and you're going to be fine. It's Apple. You have to be an Apple.
Yeah.
Google, Spotify, and Amazon. There's another one coming up that I really like that I'm excited about, but it's not a major player yet. And that's the Podcast Index, podcastindex.org. But if you're in those other 4, that's Apple, Google, Spotify, and Amazon, you'll get found. You'll be fine. Yeah. Don't worry about any of the rest of them. You can go add to those when you get around to it.
All right. So, Charles, we've been talking for some time, and I wish we had more time to keep talking because
I could talk about this all day.
So could I. It's a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as you know. But we do have to start to wrap. So my last question for you is, what is the single biggest mistake you see people make starting a podcast that our listeners can avoid? And then where can they go to learn more from you and get access to more of the great resources you're putting together to help with this whole process?
Right. So I kind of alluded to it in my rant about artwork. And the biggest mistake that I see people making, honestly, is that they are doing the show for themselves. They don't go out. I mean, if you want to just talk out there for your own whatever and hear your voice, I'm not going to fault you for that. But if you want your show to make a difference, if you want your show to bring in business, if you want your show to influence people, then you've got to make it about the people that you're trying to reach. And that, I mean, the long and the short of it is that if you're talking to the people in your audience, if you're giving them opportunities to reach out to you, then you will know what they want. If you're watching your numbers, now I'm not saying watch your numbers as far as I broke 1,000. No, it's, over this time last month, we've grown 10%, right? That's usually a good indicator that you're doing something right. You can go look at the episodes that really hit, right? That really get a lot more downloads than the others, and you'll have those. And do more content around that, right? And so it's those means of listening to your audience and connecting with the people that you want to really reach that makes the biggest difference. And it's funny because I've been doing these interviews for Podcast Growth Summit, and over and over and over again, people are like, yeah, well, I help people grow their audiences. And what it turns out is that most people who are successfully growing their shows, you ask them what they did to grow, and they'll look at you and go, And the reason is because they just put out quality content. Their audience did the rest of the work by going out and saying, this is good stuff. You need to listen to it. Right. So in my case, it's, hey, we're trying to solve this problem in our Rails app. Oh, well, it turns out that we need this library. There's an episode on Ruby Rogues about it. Let's go listen to it. And then we can go implement this stuff, right? That's where the payoff is. And so if you know your audience well enough to know what they need, and then you can put the content out that addresses it, that's what's going to pay off. But if you're making the show all about yourself, it's the me show about me stuff because I want to hear myself speak. It just doesn't work out that way. It really doesn't. You're going to wind up driving people away.
So make good content is basically the summation of that. Make good content that adds value.
Good targeted content.
Yeah.
For the people whose problem you can solve.
So that's the key takeaway. And with that, Charles, where can our listeners go and learn more from you and find the great resources that you're creating to help them create podcasts? Yeah.
So I am working on getting a ton of content up on Podcast Playbook. That's podcastplaybook.co. Like I said, if you go to podcastplaybook.co/agency profit, then you can get that PDF. I'm also putting together a growth summit, podcast growth summit. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about there, it's focused on people who have been doing a show for a little while. But the reality is that most of the stuff we're talking about is fundamental stuff that if you do it on your show, even from the beginning or before the beginning, some people have actually done this. They're like, well, before I even started the show, I would have done this. Right. And then as I was ramping up, I would have done this. I'm asking them for, okay, you've been doing this for three to 6 months and you have 500 listeners or so, but they back all the way up. And it's because these fundamentals consistently make the difference. So Podcast Growth Summit is the other place.
All right. So check out the show notes for those of you that want to check out those resources. Make sure you go check out that checklist. I know Charles is good about sharing processes, procedures, really like the nerdy stuff behind the scenes on how to get your podcast done, which we all love here on the Agency Profit Podcast. So
done.
Make sure you check it out. And with that, Charles, thanks so much for your time and for coming on here and showing us behind the scenes and telling us how it's done.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is always fun. I always get a little animated. But, it's because I love this stuff. And honestly, I feel more and more like what people need is going to come out of the niches that they belong to and not out of kind of the general purpose stuff that you get on TV or radio. And I feel like this is where we're going to make a difference in the world. So, yeah, like I said, I could talk about this forever. But yeah, that's it. That's the magic is just, hey, there are these people and I can help them.
There it is. So for those of you listening at home, leave us a comment wherever you're listening to this. Let us know what you got from it. Let us know what questions you have, and we'll see you in the next episode. Well, that's all for today's episode, but it doesn't have to be the end of your learning journey. Make sure you subscribe to our show so you never miss another episode. And if you want to get access to more great resources, be sure to check out parakeeto.com, where we've got tons of other free resources, including the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which is loaded with templates, checklists, and training videos to help you improve your agency's profitability fast. And of course, if you like the show, it would really help us out if you could leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might get value so you can help us serve more people. So with that, thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode.